They didn't just tear down a wall. They erased a piece of my family like it was nothing, like it was in their way. So yeah, I made sure I became their biggest obstacle. It started on a morning that felt wrong before I even knew why. You ever get that feeling? Like the air itself is off, like something familiar has quietly disappeared while you were asleep. The wind was the first clue. It came rushing over the ridge behind my house, fast and unfiltered, like it had finally found an opening after years of being held back. That's when my stomach dropped, because I knew exactly what that meant before I even saw it. I walked up that slope slower than usual, not because I didn't want to get there, but because some part of me already knew I wasn't going to like what I'd find. And sure enough, it was gone. The stone fence, or what used to be a fence. Now it was just rubble. Gray stones scattered across the grass like bones after a storm, tire tracks cutting deep into the soil like scars that hadn't even had time to settle yet. It wasn't old damage either. This was fresh, deliberate, clean destruction. No attempt to preserve it, no effort to move it aside, just bulldozed straight through like it didn't matter. And that's the thing, that fence mattered. My grandfather built it by hand, one rock at a time, back when this land was just raw hillside and stubborn dreams. He didn't have machinery, didn't have a crew, just patience and a belief that if you placed something carefully enough, it could outlast you. My dad added to it years later, after every landslide, every storm that tried to push the hill a little closer to giving up. That wall wasn't just a boundary, it was a timeline, a record of effort, survival, and honestly, pride. And now, it was flattened into gravel like it never existed. I stood there for a while, just staring at it. Not even angry yet, just trying to process how something that had been there for decades could disappear overnight without a single conversation. Then I heard the engines. Low, heavy, idling like they were waiting for permission they were never going to ask for. I turned and looked across the ridge, and that's when I saw it, the project. Massive, tower cranes swinging slow against the sky like they owned the horizon. Concrete columns rising out of the ground like someone had started building a city and forgot to stop. And right there at the edge of it all, a billboard. Huge, polished, confident. Hillside living with seamless connectivity. I actually laughed when I read that. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly disconnected from reality. Seamless. Huh. Yeah, I guess things are seamless when you just remove whatever's in your way. That's when one of their guys started walking toward me. Clean boots, hard hat, clipboard, the whole "I'm in charge of something important" look. He didn't seem nervous, didn't seem apologetic, just efficient. Like this was another item on his checklist. "Morning," he said, casual as anything. "We're optimizing the terrain for equipment access." Optimizing. I remember that word because it hit me harder than anything else. "That fence," he continued, gesturing vaguely behind me, "was outside your active use zone. We needed a wider path for machinery. Outside my use zone." I looked back at the stones, then at him, trying to figure out if he actually believed what he was saying or if this was just the script they trained him to use. "You didn't call," I said. He shrugged slightly, like it wasn't really his department. "It was cleared under project expansion allowances." Of course it was. That's the thing about big developments. They don't ask, they assume. They operate like momentum is permission, like the bigger they get, the less anyone can push back. I didn't argue. Not right there. There's a certain kind of calm that hits you when something crosses the line so cleanly you don't even need to react immediately. You just observe. Store it. Let it settle into something sharper. So I nodded, turned, and walked back down the slope. That probably confused him. It wasn't until later that evening, when the noise died down and the machines went quiet, that I went back up there. The air felt different without all the activity, like the land itself was trying to breathe again. And that's when I noticed the path they'd carved. It wasn't random. It cut straight through where the fence used to stand, then curved down the ridge toward a narrow valley road below. Not a big road, not something you'd even notice unless you knew where to look, but it was positioned perfectly. Wide enough at one critical bend for heavy vehicles to turn safely, narrow everywhere else. And suddenly, something clicked. I stood there looking at that bend for a long time, trying to remember why it felt familiar, why it mattered. Then it came back to me, a conversation from years ago, sitting at my uncle's kitchen table, old maps spread out between us, coffee going cold while he pointed at faded lines and boundaries. "This section right here," he had said, tapping the exact curve I was staring at now. This is ours. Always has been. Developers got temporary access years ago, early excavation phase. But temporary doesn't mean permanent. People forget that. Temporary. That word echoed in my head the same way optimized had earlier that morning. Except this time, it felt different. This wasn't their language. This was ours. I went home that night with a very specific kind of energy. Not anger. Not exactly. More like clarity. Because here's the thing. They thought they had leverage. They thought scale and speed gave them control. They assumed that because they could knock something down, they could keep moving forward without consequence. But they missed something. They didn't just destroy a wall, they exposed a dependency. And dependencies, those are fragile. I barely slept that night. Not because I was upset, but because my brain wouldn't shut off. It kept replaying that map, that curve in the road, that word, temporary, over and over again. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I went out to the shed behind my house, the one that still smells like old paper and oil, and dug through a metal filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. Dust everywhere, folders stacked tight, labels faded but still readable if you knew what you were looking for. It took me a while, but then I found it. Stamped, dated, signed. A right-of-way agreement. Temporary access granted to developers for construction movement across that exact stretch of land. And more importantly, revocable. I sat there for a second just holding it, not smiling, not celebrating, just appreciating the quiet weight of it. Because this wasn't about revenge, not really. This was about balance. About reminding someone that control goes both ways. They had their machines, their cranes, their polished marketing slogans. But I had something they clearly forgot to account for. Permission. And I was about to take it back. All right, let me pause the story for a second, because this is where things get interesting, not just emotionally, but structurally, like how these situations actually work in the real world. According to standard procedure, when developers need access through private land, even temporarily, they don't own that access, they lease it. And those agreements almost always come with expiration clauses or revocation rights. It's not generosity, it's legal necessity. Without that paper trail, their entire operation becomes vulnerable. Now here's where people mess up. They assume temporary just means long enough that no one will challenge it. That's not law. That's convenience. From a legal perspective, what they did by tearing down that fence without clear consent, that's potential trespass, possibly property damage, depending on jurisdiction. And once you combine that with relying on a revocable access route, you're basically building a house of cards and hoping no one notices the bottom layer. But here's the deeper layer. This is a psychological trap developers fall into all the time. This is a psychological trap. When you operate at scale, you start believing smaller stakeholders won't push back. You normalize ignoring them, because most people don't fight. The lesson here is simple. Power isn't just about size, it's about leverage, and leverage often hides in paperwork nobody bothered to read twice. So yeah, once I had that document in my hands, everything got very quiet in my head. Not peaceful quiet, focused quiet. Like when you finally understand the rules of a game, everyone else thought you didn't even know you were playing. I didn't rush it. That's important. People think revenge, or whatever you want to call this, is about speed. It's not. It's about timing. I drove into town 2 days later, parked outside the county administrative building, the kind of place that always smells faintly like paper and coffee that's been sitting too long. Fluorescent lights, slow lines, people flipping through forms like they're decoding something ancient. I took a number, sat down, and waited. When my turn came, I walked up to the counter and slid the document across. I'd like to file a termination notice on this right-of-way agreement, I said, calm, clear. The clerk, middle-aged, glasses halfway down his nose, looked at it, then looked at me, then back at the document again like he wanted to make sure he wasn't missing something. You understand, he said slowly. This access is currently being used for an active construction project. I do, I replied. And terminating it would significantly impact their ability to operate. I nodded. That's correct. He leaned back slightly, studying me now, not the paper. Most people don't do this unless there's a dispute. I almost smiled. There is. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He stamped the form, processed it, and just like that, the countdown started. See, paperwork doesn't feel dramatic when you're doing it. There's no music, no tension, just signatures and stamps. But what it does, that's where the story happens. The notice moved through its channels, slow and procedural, like everything in government systems, until it didn't. Because once it hit the right desk, everything sped up in a very specific direction, toward consequences. It happened on a Monday. Still dark out. Just that early gray light starting to bleed into the sky. I was up already. Couldn't sleep much those days. Not out of stress, but anticipation. There's a difference. Stress feels heavy. Anticipation feels sharp. Around 5:30 a.m., I heard the first truck. Then another. Then a whole line of them. I walked up the ridge again. Same path, same slope. But this time, I wasn't wondering what I'd find. I knew. And right there at that bend in the valley road. Barricades. Bright orange, reflective strips catching headlights like warning signals. Solid. Unmistakable. Official. The first truck came around the curve too fast. You could hear it before you saw it. The engine straining, tires gripping gravel. Then suddenly, brakes. Hard. Loud. That sharp, grinding protest of something heavy realizing it doesn't have the space it thought it did. The driver leaned out the window, confused, looking ahead, then back, like maybe he took a wrong turn. Except he didn't. There was nowhere else to go. Behind him, more trucks started stacking up, engines idling, drivers stepping out, voices rising. Not panic yet, just confusion. The kind that hasn't realized it's about to become a problem. But it didn't take long. Within an hour, site supervisors showed up. Radios crackling, boots hitting dirt fast, pointing, gesturing, trying to understand why their perfectly scheduled morning just stopped. I stayed up on the ridge, watching. Not hiding, just not participating. One of them finally spotted me. You could tell by the way his body shifted, like a switch flipped in his head. He walked up fast, not running, but definitely not casual either. "Hey," he called out. "Do you know what's going on here?" I took my time answering. "Looks like access has been restricted." His jaw tightened slightly. "Yeah, we can see that." "Do you know why?" I tilted my head just a little. "You might want to check your agreements." That's when it hit him. You could actually see the moment. His eyes narrowed, posture changed, not aggressive, calculating. "Did you do this?" I didn't answer directly. Didn't need to. He exhaled through his nose, short and controlled. "You realize you're halting a multi-million-dollar project." I shrugged. "You realized you were destroying private property." That landed. Harder than anything else I could have said. He didn't argue. Not there. Not in that moment. Because people like that, they don't fight battles they're not prepared for. They retreat, regroup, escalate properly. And that's exactly what happened. By mid-morning, the site was chaos, but controlled chaos. Trucks being redirected, calls being made, someone definitely getting yelled at somewhere far above the pay grade of anyone on that hill. But the real damage? That came later. See, construction doesn't run on effort, it runs on timing. Everything is scheduled down to the hour. Concrete pours, material deliveries, crew coordination. You miss one window, it doesn't just delay that task, it cascades. And that's what I was watching unfold. Concrete trucks couldn't reach the site in time, which meant pours had to be canceled. And you don't just pause concrete, it sets when it sets. So entire batches were wasted. Thousands of dollars, gone, because a truck couldn't make a turn. Crews showed up ready to work and had nothing to do. You ever seen a construction crew stand around? It's not peaceful. It's expensive. Every minute they're idle, money is bleeding. Cranes? Still. Completely still. Those massive machines that had been swinging like they owned the skyline just days ago, frozen in place, like someone hit pause on the entire project. And the calls? Oh, the calls started piling up. Investors don't like silence. They don't like uncertainty. And when timelines start slipping, they don't ask, why gently? They demand answers. By day 3, rumors started spreading. Not official statements. Those always take longer, but whispers. Something's wrong with access. They can't get equipment up the ridge. Delays might be longer than expected. By the end of the week, those whispers turned into conversations in real estate offices. Buyers who had already put down deposits started asking questions. And here's the thing about buyers, they don't like risk. You tell someone your future home might be delayed indefinitely. Suddenly that dream starts looking like a liability. Sales teams shifted tone fast. What used to be confident pitches turned into careful explanations, then into apologies. All projects face minor delays. We're working through a temporary access issue. Temporary. Funny how that word came back around. Week 2 hit harder. That's when it stopped being a hiccup and started becoming a problem. Meetings got more serious. You could feel it even from a distance. More vehicles showing up that didn't belong to regular site crews. Black SUVs, clean, corporate. People stepping out in pressed clothes, not work boots. Decision makers. And then, finally, they came to me. It was late afternoon when I heard the car pull up near my gate. Not a construction truck this time. Not a supervisor scrambling to fix something. This was different. Slower. Intentional. I walked out to meet them before they even knocked. The man who stepped out looked exactly like you'd expect. A project director type. Clean cut, composed, but there was something missing now. That edge of confidence. Gone. Replaced with something more measured. "Mr. Carter," he said, offering a hand. "I believe we need to talk." I didn't take the hand right away. Not out of disrespect, just setting the tone. "I think you're right," I said. We stood there for a second, just looking at each other. No rush. No performance. Then he got straight to it. No small talk. No pretending this was anything other than what it was. "We'd like to resolve the current access issue," he said. "Access issue," I repeated. "That's what we're calling it." A brief pause. He adjusted slightly. "We understand there were actions taken on our side that affected your property." That was as close to an apology as he was willing to get. "We're prepared to rebuild the stone fence," he continued, "and compensate for any damages caused." I listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't react. Just let him finish. Because here's the shift that had happened. 2 weeks ago, they had control. Now, they were negotiating. And negotiation means leverage. I took a breath, looked past him toward the ridge, toward where the fence used to stand. "Rebuilding it isn't enough?" I said finally. He nodded slightly, like he expected that. "What are your terms?" Now this part matters. Because this is where a lot of people mess up. They go emotional. They overreach. They turn a strong position into an unreasonable demand and lose everything. I didn't do that. I kept it clean. Precise. Grounded. Full restoration, I said. Not just rebuilding, traditional stonework. The way it was done originally. He didn't hesitate. Agreed. Second, I continued, legal recognition of that ridge as a protected heritage boundary. No future modifications without written consent. A slight pause this time. Not resistance, calculation. Then, that can be arranged. Third, I said, looking directly at him now. A permanent easement agreement. If you want to use that road going forward, it's not temporary anymore. It's paid. That one hit. You could see it. Not because it was unreasonable, but because it shifted the entire dynamic long-term. He exhaled slowly, glanced back toward his car, probably running numbers in his head, timelines, losses, pressure from above. Then he looked back at me. Agreed. Just like that. Faster than I expected, honestly. Because at that point, this wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival of the project. And they knew it. We shook hands. This time I took it, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but as confirmation. Because the truth is, they didn't come to rebuild a fence. They came because they couldn't afford not to. So, what do you actually take away from something like this? Because on the surface, yeah, it looks like a clean little revenge story. Guy gets his fence destroyed, finds a loophole, shuts down a big project, gets compensated, roll credits. But if that's all you see, you're missing the part that actually matters. The lesson here is, this was never about the fence. I know that sounds weird, because the whole thing started with those stones getting crushed into the dirt, but the fence was just the trigger. The real story? It was about boundaries, legal ones, personal ones, and the kind people assume they can cross when they think you won't push back. Because here's what I've learned, most people don't escalate. They complain, they vent, maybe they argue a little, but they don't go all the way. And companies, especially big ones, know that. They build entire strategies around that assumption. This is a psychological trap, not just for them, but for you too. You start thinking, what can I really do? They've got lawyers, money, momentum, and before you know it, you've already given up leverage you didn't even realize you had. That's how people get walked over, not because they're weak, but because they don't know where their strength actually is. And in my case, it wasn't physical, it wasn't loud, it wasn't even confrontational, it was paperwork. Boring, dusty, forgotten paperwork. According to standard procedure, access agreements like the one I had aren't rare. They're everywhere. Temporary permissions, shared driveways, utility easements, little pieces of legal language that sit quietly in filing cabinets until someone needs them. The problem is, most people never go back and look. Developers count on that. They assume time equals ownership. That if something's been happening long enough, no one's going to question it anymore. And to be fair, they're usually right. But usually isn't always. From a legal perspective, what happened here is actually pretty simple. They overstepped. They treated private property like an inconvenience instead of a boundary, and they relied on access that wasn't guaranteed. That combination, it's risky. Not flashy, not dramatic, but structurally risky. And when you expose that risk, everything shifts. Because suddenly, it's not about who has the bigger machine or the louder voice. It's about who holds the critical point of failure. In this case, a single bend in a road. That's all it took. Not a lawsuit, not a protest, not some huge public battle. Just one legally controlled access point that they couldn't replace fast enough. And that's something people underestimate all the time. How small the leverage point can actually be. You don't need to control everything. You just need to control the thing they can't operate without. Now, does that mean you should go out looking for ways to get back at people? No, that's not the takeaway. If anything, this situation could have gone very differently if they had just handled it with a little respect from the beginning. A phone call, a conversation, even a basic acknowledgement that the fence mattered, we probably wouldn't even be talking about this. But they didn't. They chose efficiency over respect, speed over communication. And that decision, it cost them time, money, and control. So the real takeaway is this. Pay attention to what you actually own. Not just physically, but legally. Understand your agreements, your boundaries, your rights, even the boring ones. Especially the boring ones. Because those are the ones people overlook, and overlooked things are where leverage hides. And on the flip side, if you're ever in the position of power, whether that's running a project, managing land, or making decisions that affect other people, don't assume silence means consent. Sometimes silence just means someone is watching, waiting, figuring out exactly where you're vulnerable. And when they find it, it doesn't take much to shift the entire balance. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't even argue that much. I just paid attention. And when the time came, I acted. That's it. So yeah, maybe it started with a broken fence, but it ended with something a lot bigger. A reminder that respect isn't optional, and leverage doesn't always look the way you expect. Now I'm curious, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have let it go, tried to negotiate first, or taken the same route I did? Let me know down in the comments. I read more of those than you'd think.